you see, having gone through the Beatlemania thing, nowadays it's nothing like that. I mean, I can walk down the street and somebody will say, "Oh, hi, John," and they usually say, "How's your immigration?" You know, if it's in New York, right? And they don't hassle me. I might sign one autograph, two autographs, you know? And I don't get hassled. And I went through that period where I actually couldn't go anywhere. And so now it's like heaven. I can go and eat. We go and eat. We go to the movies. We go wherever we want.
John Lennon was walking down a street on the west side of New York last night between 10 and 11 o'clock Eastern Time when he was shot down by an assailant. He is dead tonight in a senseless and terrible, terrible moment. The interview that you just saw, the portion of that interview, was first recorded here in New York at the NBC studios during April of 1975. And to this day, the John Lennon Show, as it is called in the Tomorrow series, is still one of the most often requested programs for repeat purposes. And we're going to run the entire interview tonight, not because it's a terrific interview or it's terribly entertaining or enlightening. It is, after all, 5 years old. But curiously, it turns out that possibly this interview is the last television interview that John Lennon ever did. It contains no historic information, nothing terribly new, but after all, it is a little bit of stuff and substance of a man who was part of a change, a revolution, if you will, in popular music back during the 1960s. And during the 1970s, John Lennon found a new lifestyle for himself, which he will discuss during this interview. A bit later on, we have Lisa Robinson, who did one of the last interviews with John Lennon, which will appear in the New York Times syndication service later on, and Mr. Jack Douglas, who produced John and Yoko Ono's current album, Double Fantasy, who was with John and Yoko shortly before his tragic death here in New York last night. As promised, here is John Lennon, and a little bit later on in the program, we'll talk about the possibility of his having to leave the United States, and at that time, his attorney, Mr. Leon Wilds, will join us to make certain that John or I make no mistakes in the legalities. But I welcome you here, and I'm glad that you're here. As I said at the outset, back in 1964, after the cataclysmic arrival of the Beatles here in the United States and the great popularity you had on the Ed Sullivan program and others, there were many people who did not really understand what you were doing, and they thought then that your hair was long and that you looked modish, you know, and you were revolutionary. Does it surprise you at all that it took so many of us such a long time to get into your act and to realize what you were doing?
No, it was mainly parents, and they were against rock and roll, you know. Anyway, before the Beatles came along. I mean, people have been trying to stamp out rock and roll since it started.
Why do you think that is? What are they afraid of?
I always thought it was because it came from black music, and the words had a lot of double entendre in the early days. And it was sort of, you know, the white kids, our white, nice wasps are going to go crazy with all this, moving their bodies. You know, the music got to your body, and the Beatles just carried it a bit further, made it a little more white even than Elvis did. Because we were English, you know. And people couldn't hear it. That's why they didn't understand it.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. You know, one could never understand the words until one sat down with the record album. I went to a couple of your personal appearances, including one I think in Philadelphia in 1965 in an outdoor location.
Oh, yeah.
And there was so much screaming and so much carrying on. And did that bother you at all when you were doing those concerts? That people couldn't hear your music, that all they heard was themselves screaming?
It got a little boring. I mean, it was great when it first happened. When you'd come on, there'd just be nothing but wah, you know. But then we just became like lip-syncing, you know, miming. And sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good, you know.
When you guys were in the dressing rooms after these concerts, or when you were in the dressing room after the Ed Sullivan Show, where, my heavens, young people were just almost flinging themselves on stage.
Yeah.
Didn't you ever wonder, are these people crazy? Are we that good? Can we really produce this kind of reaction in people?
We didn't think whether we're that good or not. You've got to think you're good to do what we did, you know. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, and so there was never a time when you thought, what's going on? And that was about as deep as it got. What is happening, or what? You know, you'd suddenly wake up in the middle of a concert or a happening, and think, what? How did I get here, you know? The last thing I remember was playing music in a club, and the next minute this. But we never thought about it too much, because it was an ongoing thing. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see, you know. We were just in the middle, being ushered from room to room.
As I recall, there were fan clubs or clubs of followers formed for each of the individuals in the organization.
Well, it was mainly a Beatle club, but, you know, they sort of fanned it out a little just to keep the...
And I'm just wondering how unified any group can be. And I'm not singling out the group that you belong to, the
Yeah.
Beatles, but how unified can any group be when the audience has certain favorites? Maybe they like Paul more than they like John or something like that. And I wonder... I got right to it, didn't I? Yeah. I just wondered if it's awfully difficult to be friends, and do you really care about whether or not you're friends when you are a group such as the Beatles, or whether you're the Rolling Stones or whoever?
We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know. And boredom creates tension.
How can you get bored doing what you did?
Because it was going on, it was not going anywhere, you know. We'd stopped touring, and we'd just sort of say, time to make an album, you know, go in the studio, and the same four of us would be looking at each other and playing the same licks.
And those silly haircuts, yeah.
Those silly haircuts that you have now. You notice he's got his now. And we were very good friends, and we'd known each other since we were 15, you know, and we got over all the actual fighting, the real nitty-gritty, dirty, you know, stuff, which had nothing to do with how popular we were. The same popularity, meaning Paul was always more popular than the rest of us, was going down in the dance halls in Liverpool, so it didn't come as any big surprise, you know. I mean, the kids saw him, the girls would go, ooh, ooh, you know, right away. So we knew where the score was there. But it was a group, it was the music that was interesting, that was important, not who was, you know, as long as we were, you know, going forward and going somewhere, it didn't matter.
But all of a sudden there just wasn't any further progress. It was the same old over and over again.
Yeah, it just got like a marriage that doesn't work.
Now, there are some groups that are quite open in their advocacy in the music that they present. They advocate social justice. They call for an end to war. They wish for a time when there might be a change in the drug possession laws. Your music did not do that. There wasn't a great deal of out-and-out editorialization in the songs that the Beatles did. At least I didn't feel it, and I don't think that a lot of parents felt it.
Now, all our messages were subliminal, you know. Meaning we were sending messages out, all right, but...
yeah, but what kinds of messages?
Just reporting on the state we were in, you know, looking back on it. And we made things like All You Need Is Love, you know, which is our version.
That's a pretty wholesome message, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wholesome. But it was still a change in attitude. We're part of that psychedelic stuff. Now, which groups you talking about this advocate change?
Well, I really don't know them offhand, except I sat down one evening with David Crosby, and we were talking about some songs that have been done by a number of groups, and since I don't have them fixed in my memory, I shouldn't say it was the Rolling Stones, or it was this or that or the other thing.
It must have been people doing Dylan songs, more likely.
All right.
Yeah. Are we on or what? No.
Yes, we are on, but we're on back there. Did you want to turn around and wave to the people?
I'd just like to know where it's coming from.
All right. You're over here, and I'm over there, and we're over there.
Yeah.
Huh?
Hi.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I like the set now. It's got better, you know. I watch the show all the time.
Thank you. But in any event, your message was subliminal. You didn't have any axe to grind with social injustice, or did you?
No, our only axe was we were the first working class singers that stayed working class and pronounced it. Didn't try and change our accents, which in England were looked down upon, probably still are. Like a Bronx accent, it's equivalent to that. The only change was our image, you know, being slightly... What do you want? What do you want?
Get me off the hook.
Yeah, you're right.
A Bronx accent, it could be a Brooklyn accent, it could be...
Oh, yeah, Brooklyn was the one I meant,
okay,
actually.
all right, fine. Just get me off the hook.
Because that sounds like Liverpool. They talk like that there, duty, you know? I mean, all the stars in England before... There were a couple of sort of rock and roll stars before us, but any major star in England had to change his voice. They do it in America to get on TV and radio, right? Hi, I'm from nowhere. That's the one George Carlin does. Well, that goes in England, too.
Do you know that I once took an audition at a station in the southern part of the United States with a young woman who wanted to do the weather forecast on the television station? And for some curious reason, a southern accent at that time was not acceptable even in the southern United States. And so she asked the engineers if they could put the filter on the microphone that took the southern accent out of all of our voices. And, of course, there is no such filter.
No.
And you had to be there, and then you would have realized how humorous that was at the
time.
Well,
I laughed, didn't I?
Yeah, but you laughed because you're a good guy.
No, filter, I understand the business, you know, recording, filters. Look funny from the side.
Do you think?
Yeah. Go on.